Hello friends, welcome to a special report from Muddy River News. I'm Aspen Giggenbacher, and today we are going to be talking about the Qrile ordinance. If you haven't heard of it, you might have seen some of the landlord association's yard signs around town, and essentially it pertains to the maintenance and inspection of rental properties in town. I have with me the best people that could speak on this. I have Brennan Hills with Qrile. I also have Jackie Weisenberger and Conlon Carabine with the Quincy Landlord Rental Association. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that everyone at this table cares about this issue of housing very deeply, and they are doing a lot of important work in this community to make a difference on that front. So with that being said, we will go ahead and get into it. Brennan, I'll start with you. If you could just give me the Spark Notes version of this ordinance.
Yeah, so absolutely. My name is Brennan Hills. I'm a co-founder of Qrile, which stands for Quincy for Registration, Inspection, and Licensing Enactment, and that's the essential basis of what the ordinance does. Right now, there is no database of rental registration in our community, meaning that the city does not officially know which properties in our community are being used as rental properties, which are vacant, and which are owner-occupied. There are ways that they find things like that out right now through tax records, etc. But there's no real database showing which properties are rentals. So the registration part comes in there. The inspection part, that is an inspection takes place every 6 months to 3 years, depending on the grade that a landlord is given based on how many violations that they have present in their properties. And then the licensing part is the license that is given to the landlord to show that they are able to rent because they have passed inspections and have their properties up to code sufficiently. So that's kind of the general outline. There definitely is more detail there, but that's the Spark Notes. So.
Gotcha. And if people want to see a full copy of the ordinance, they can go on your website, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's q-rile.org, q-rile.org.
And this is a non-binding referendum, right?
Yeah, so it's a non-binding referendum. Unfortunately, Illinois is not really a referenda state. We thought about doing a binding referenda, but just the way that works in Illinois, you have to be very specific and intentional. The only one that was passed in the last 30 years was in reference to how many swine you could have on your farm. And so it was just a very complex thing, and this advisory thing also gives a leeway to the city council to improve it any way that they see fit.
So in a nutshell, someone voting for this, if it passes with the voters, it doesn't mean that it goes into effect, correct?
Yeah, it could pass 99% to 1%, and the city council legally has to do nothing. It's just kind of a way for citizens to voice their concern about this issue. So.
Gotcha. And then in kind of summarizing the points of opposition, I would say that I noticed in looking at the QLRA Facebook group that there are really three main points. One is that more regulations would be burdensome for landlords. Two, that the implementation of this program would significantly drive up rent prices. And three, what's on the books already should be enforced before anything else. Is that a fair assessment?
There's some additional kind of key points. And probably one of the biggest one is, as you probably are aware, most people are aware, there's already a process in place, which is a complaint-driven process. In other words, a tenant lives in an apartment or a house, and they feel that their home is not to code. They can fill out a complaint and bring an inspector into the property, which then generates that process of the city going through assessing codes, violations, etc. One of the key kind of actually pushbacks on this proposal is that this basically mandates that there would be 100% inspection. So personally, one of my pushbacks on it would actually, which you didn't mention, is that whether a tenant wants the government in their home or not, and again, it's not binding, there's additional steps to get there, this would force that. So basically the government is going to be coming into your home. If you rent a property in Quincy, whether you pay rent or not, there's going to be an inspector scheduled at some point to come into your home to see if it's to code. I think there's a lot of kind of reasons why I don't think that's really fair for the tenant. Number one, it's their home, and so and if the tenant refuses, I mean, not only talking about the landlord, but if the tenant refuses that inspection, as it's laid out in the inspection, the city's going to go get a search warrant. And they're going to come into that home to inspect. I think that's kind of goes against a lot of our constitutional setup of how our homes are respected as our homes. That's probably my biggest kind of pushback. The fees, absolutely. There's the fees, the coordinating inspections, and all of that go along with that that are burdensome. It's burdensome to landlords, it's burdensome to tenants. But my biggest pushback, to be honest with you, is that it's basically forcing entry into somebody's home.
So can I respond to that?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So if you do look at the ordinance, again on q-rile.org, you'll find that in Section 7, Inspections, letter C is a notice of inspection and right to refuse. And actually what it says is that notice of periodic inspections of rental units pursuant to this section shall be given in writing to each the owner and the tenant of the rental unit a minimum of 7 days prior to the inspection. And what was referenced in terms of the search warrant, that is number 3. And if any owner or occupant objects to a periodic inspection, no inspection of the rental unit shall be undertaken without an administrative search warrant. This does not say that immediately an administrative search warrant would be something that the city pursues. That would be more in a case in which there's a property that's obviously unlivable. Say there are broken windows that are visible from the outside. You can see that the home is caving in, and the city deems it necessary to take such action. Then they would be able to go get a search warrant and bypass this right to refuse. But there is certainly a right to refuse that is built into this ordinance to combat that specific concern.
Gotcha. And I do kind of want to go over a little bit more of the process as you kind of went into. And this is taken directly from an interview that I did in September with Michael Sievert, the Director of Inspection and Enforcement. So essentially right now the process is, as Conlon said, a complaint-driven process. So if a tenant has an issue, they can submit a minimum housing complaint form. That kind of triggers the whole process. An inspection is then conducted. If any violations are found, the landlord is given a written notice and is given a reasonable amount of time to make those changes. And then after that period of time, the department is to go in and make a reinspection, which is kind of complicated if the tenant that made that complaint is no longer living there. Because the only way that they can get into that property is if a tenant invites them in. So if a tenant made the complaint, gets evicted in the meantime, there's no way for the department to really get back into that unit to inspect it again. If the time period expires and the corrections still have not been made at the point of reinspection, then the landlord gets a ticket that could get them into ordinance violation court where they would pay a fine and a judge might order them to make the corrections. At this time, we have no inspectors in that department that are entirely devoted to just minimum housing complaint inspections. And so he kind of addressed some existing problems with that system. The main thing is that it is a complaint-only basis, which the argument for that is that it's really efficient in that you don't have to go through all of the units that are perfectly up to code that have nothing wrong with them. But the main holdup, he said, was the involvement of tenants, and that, yes, they might not want people in their space. A lot of times, some of these complaints are more so motivated by something other than the need for maintenance, like if somebody is trying to prolong an eviction or something of that sort. So he said that a lot of times they kind of get caught in the middle of that, and they're just trying to figure out if something is safe, and then they get caught into a lot of things that are really beyond the scope of the inspection and enforcement department. And that's another thing too, is that if anything goes into the courts, it can really, really slow things down. So I know of one instance right now, her apartment has been in horrible conditions for years now, and she got an inspection in December, and the landlord was finally ticketed at the end of February, but we still don't know if that ticket has even been served to him yet. And at that point, the whole process has really been fulfilled, but it's just out of their hands. So with that being established now, my first official question is going to be for you guys. We do inspections of restaurants, of daycares. Some people are wondering what makes rental properties any different, if that's where we eat, that's where we sleep.
That's 1,000 times different. And I know you've used this argument before, which is if you open an ice cream shop, it gets inspected, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot. With all due respect, that's a rough comparison, and I'll explain to you why. Number one, it's not the city that inspects that ice cream shop; it's the health inspector, right? Because they're serving food. You'd say, well, people live there, sure, but all those examples that are given, ice cream shop, stores, restaurants, all of those properties are open to the public. So it's the public. You can walk down the street and you can enter that space. So there's a different requirement for a public space compared to a rental. And let me explain what a rental is, really. It's a property that's an individual owns and then leases to another individual party, family, person, etc., and that becomes their home. That becomes their residence. That is anything but a public space. It's 100% not comparable, to use the argument of the ice cream shop example, to say, absolutely, the government needs to go in and inspect that property. It's just not comparable.
My follow-up question to that would be, there are many apartment buildings in this community, and you can enter the common areas of those apartment buildings. I could walk into the common area of an apartment building today.
It's still private property.
That may be unsafe. And so it is, open to the public. Many people who may not even be renters of those apartment buildings could walk into a space that is unsafe.
Sure.
So,
but that threshold I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah, so, and not only that, but another point you made was that the city does not inspect, say, the ice cream shop, but that's just not true. I work at Electric Fountain Brewing, and 2 times in the last 2 months has the city fire department came in to ensure that we are compliant with the city's fire code. Okay. So that's a city department that's come in to inspect a place that is being used to make a profit, just like rental units are being used to make a profit. There are codes on the books with, ice cream shops or coffee shops or retail stores, and those codes have to be complied with. And it's no different for the city to say, we have residential building codes that people need to comply with, and we are ensuring that they are complying with these basic codes that are already on the books. It's no different.
Again, I would push back on that. I mean, the apartment building example that you give, the hallways, right? Like anybody can just walk into an apartment complex and walk into the hallways.
Yeah.
Actually, unless they're there as a guest of one of those residents, they're essentially not legally supposed to be there, right? So,
well, that's not true at all. I could be there to tour an apartment. I could be there because my friend does live there, and I'm unaware of the safety concerns.
Yeah, if you're a guest, like I'm trying to think of all my rentals.
Yeah.
All my common entries are all locked. We have one key that all those tenants get to access it, but then the door locks behind them, and really for their safety too. Like I'm trying to think, even if a guest comes, they got to walk downstairs, let them in, and then go. So they're invited.
I have apartments. I do. So I can answer that. But at the end of the day, it's not open to the public. Other than that, there's nothing that prevents somebody from going in there for sure.
Yes.
But there, you could walk into all kinds of spaces that are not open to the public. You can go into an abandoned building and you're trespassing, right?
Yeah.
That's not open to the public. That building, it's dangerous, it's abandoned.
Yeah.
And you can get in there, but that doesn't make it a public space that would be open to inspection.
Right, but again, people who are not occupants of these particular units do often enter these spaces, and so whether
But they're doing that as a guest.
Yeah, why would,
There's,
as a
there's
guest, or
very
else
few.
why
There's
would they?
very few scenarios where they would enter those hallways as not a guest. If you're delivering food to that location as DoorDash, you're there as a guest by a tenant. And I've asked people to leave my property that I knew were not there as guests.
Yeah.
They're just wandering
For
through.
sure.
As far as I'm concerned,
that's
they're
just
trespassing.
trouble.
They don't have any reason to be there. They're on private property.
They'll make my
For
tenants
for
uneasy.
instance, the crazy people that sell power, that go door to door and knock on apartments. I have a very strict, no solicitation policy. And as soon as I see those folks there, I tell them to leave. You're not there. You're not there. You haven't been invited here. You're just there harassing my residents.
regardless of whether they are a guest or not, they are not an occupant. It is not their property. They are not the one signing the lease.
Sure.
And they could be, like a DoorDasher, for example, putting themselves at risk unknowingly due to safety issues that a landlord is allowing to happen.
Exist.
Yeah, 100%.
Sure,
So
and I
whether,
guess
whether they are the owner or the occupant is not really relevant. They can enter those properties and they can put themselves in harm's way unknowingly as a result of that. So that would be my
I got you, Brennan. But in my opinion, I think that's a little bit of a stretch.
I think
The
it's
hallway,
stretching.
the hallway theory. I get you. I understand where you're going on it, but I honestly don't think that's really what we're really kind of talking about. And those property owners have liability, right? I mean, if there's something so dangerous in a hallway that somebody enters and somehow hurts themselves, or they get caught in some crazy fire or something in an apartment building or something.
Yeah.
In theory, if it's dangerous, there's a route of liability that property owner is calls
Maybe
to
so.
account.
I do want to,
I'm going to suggest move on.
Yeah,
I think we've
yeah.
kind of understood some.
Yep.
We're not going to agree. We've each stated our case.
Yes.
I think it's time. Go ahead and go to the next question.
Okay, I
Everybody
think,
puts
yes,
their point.
I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to hit on different points. I do think that maybe going forward, might have to just keep it to the original question. Okay, so next, Brennan, for you,
Yeah.
if you could just break down all of the associated costs in this ordinance.
Absolutely. So I brought that right here. The associated costs are a one-time registration fee per unit, which is $25 flat. That is paid one time when you initially register with the city to rent out your property. There's also an inspection fee, an inspection fee that is paid per unit per inspection. And that fee is $100, and that is again paid per inspection. So I talked a little bit about a grading system, and the ordinance lays out a grading system: A, B, C, D, and new properties. F means the home is unlivable, and so no fees are required because you're not renting that property out. So an A grade would mean that you have 0 violations of city code, and that means that you would be inspected every 3 years, meaning that you're paying $100 every 3 years, which breaks down to $2.77 a month. If you have a D grade, which means that you have over 10 violations of city code, but they are not life safety issues and you can continue to rent out the property, that means that you're paying $100 every 6 months, meaning that you're paying about $200 a year. So that is the associated fees.
Gotcha. Okay. And for you guys, regardless of the quality of a property, we know rental rates are increasing. Fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is now around $875 compared to $776 in 2021, and that is according to the United Way's Community Needs Assessment. You've said that the costs of the implementation of this program are going to get passed along to tenants, which means, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the landlords wouldn't have any direct costs from the implementation of this program aside from the cost of repairs to get the property up to code. So I guess I'm wondering, what are all of the ways that you are concerned that it could drive up prices?
Sure. So the reason why the landlord association specifically says this is going to drive up rents is, again, is this destroy a rental business? It does not. These are fees. The the pushback is obviously like any business model, it's an expense like the water, maintenance, mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. You know, unfortunately, the way any business works, whether you're an ice cream shop or a coffee shop or a rental business, is, you know, the additional costs ultimately are borne by the customer, in this case the tenants who have to pay rent, right? And so my frustration with this is there's a few things, and again, a lot of it I understand talking points, et cetera. But initially, when this conversation really started getting public, you know, a bunch of numbers were kind of thrown around. All I would say is these numbers are just how it's assessed, right? So $25 one time, $100 every 3 years if you have literally zero code violations. You know, so if you go into an apartment and there's a broken outlet cover, right, which is an 85-cent outlet cover, that would create a reinspection, and then the assumption is another $100 that the city is going to charge for that reinspection. If the city shows up, the tenant has to leave work. If they want to be there, the landlord has to go there. If for some reason that they mess that up, either the tenant or the landlord or whoever's meeting the inspector, because obviously somebody needs to meet the inspector to let them in. If that appointment gets missed after it's scheduled, then the assumption is there's another $100 charge that's going to be tossed into the equation here. That's going to start adding up.
That's not correct. So this fee is paid upon completion of inspection. So if you miss the inspection, you're not paying $100 for having to reschedule. Okay. That's just not correct.
The biggest expense really on this is the fact that let's just say the landlord, right, or one of his representatives, realistically will be there. So if you have 10 rental units, that's 10 inspections that you have to go to. There are landlords in town who have 300 rental units. And again, that's clearly their business, right? I do this as a business. This is what I do every day. This will add a tremendous amount of workload. That workload it's going to be expensive. And it's not even the dollars, it's the time. So if you have 20 inspections or 10 inspections this month, that's an additional huge amount of time and money and resources that have got to go to coordinating that.
How many city personnel, vehicles? We got to have the software.
And of course, there's the expense of the city side, and these fees are really designed, I believe, to cover the expense of the additional folks at the city that are going to be required to do this.
Yep.
And again, there's a lot of rental units in Quincy. We have 6,500 rental units. That's the estimate.
Yes.
It's probably a pretty good estimate.
How many are we really targeting? Is there a number, 1%, 2%?
And
is what started all this conversation? Like it's
Sure.
a small
How
number.
many complaints were there last year? And 50, 40?
50 or so.
50 or so.
And that's up from less than 10 per year for decades before safe and livable housing got involved.
But
Absolutely.
that doesn't necessarily mean that
No, it
there
doesn't.
aren't apartments that
Absolutely.
are still problematic. It just
course.
means that those are the only ones that garnered complaints.
Absolutely.
There are several reasons why someone might not submit a complaint form. A lot of them don't know that it
And
exists.
anybody, that keeps saying, anybody can file a complaint. It's not just tenant. Your neighbor, I can.
That's not true.
Yeah,
So anyone
To get
can-
into the unit, you need a tenant.
to get into the unit, you need the tenant. Absolutely.
So then it's pointless to file a complaint if you can't get into the unit.
Not if we're driving around and we see the boards or the tarps on the roof or the broken windows,
So-
extension cords being ran. Anybody can file a complaint to get the conversation started with that homeowner. It starts a conversation. Anybody can file a complaint
That much
to
is
get
true.
it started. That's what I really want to drive home. I don't want it to feel like it's just tenant driven because of the scared of the tenants, how they will get like, I don't want to be evicted, but it needs fixed. And, maybe if the inspector just walks around the outside of the building, the tenant may not be there. Maybe the letter will be delivered to that homeowner occupant. Something could be done in order for the inspector to figure out a way to get inside if he feels as though it needs it, or get a hold of the homeowner. Anybody can file a complaint. Even the home inspector, I say home inspector, I'm going to find a business. Even the city inspector can file a complaint on an address to get a process started.
In talking with Michael Seaver, though, he, and again, maybe there was some kind of miscommunication or something, but he did say that the only way that they could get into that unit.
Inside.
The unit.
Yes.
Absolutely, into the unit.
And that's where the constitutional issue comes to play.
Amendment 4.
Before you can go into somebody's home, you have to be invited by that person into your home, essentially, right now. Unless there's something that they can justify a warrant to do, which is again, somebody thinks that there's somebody harboring something or et cetera, and that requires a warrant to get in there. If not, you've got to be invited. That's just
So let's say an instance of a tenant files a complaint, an original inspection is conducted. Within the 2 weeks that landlord is given to make those corrections, tenant is evicted, they are now gone.
Well, I'll tell you, I haven't done an eviction in a long time. You're not going to evict a tenant in 2 weeks.
So let's say that they're removed for one reason or another.
Okay.
They're not there anymore. I understand that doesn't happen like that. It is a months-long process.
Right, we're talking 45 to 90-day process.
Yes.
To evict a tenant for non-payment, something they're dangerous they're doing, et cetera.
Right.
Now, if the landlord is some thug, which is what I think the elephant in the room that we're missing here, is in theory, and I get that this starts a conversation, which is a good conversation. We've had this conversation for years now. To start the point that this starts a conversation, great. I think that's a valid thing. The real elephant in the room is the slumlords of Quincy.
And I want to get to that. I do want to get to that. But the point of reinspection and the fact that the tenants who made the original complaint are not there anymore, it's a significant enough number. They were removed for whatever reason. And a lot of times, too, these evictions might not be real evictions. It might simply be a slumlord telling somebody, you're evicted, now you have to leave. And because somebody doesn't know any better, they think that that's what they have to do. I'm not saying that happens all the time. I'm not saying that is what happens in each instance of that happening.
And that would be my pushback I understand the whole point on retribution, and I understand that's a valid concern, a valid fear for a tenant. I just don't think, we don't necessarily have been given a lot of examples of that. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist, and undoubtedly it exists. Again, especially when you're talking about a group of folks who run their business completely illegally, right? I'm sure that they're not following the law anyway. So however they're managing a tenant, I've got zero doubt that there isn't pressure, et cetera, that's being exuded. But I would argue the vast majority of the resistance for tenants to start the complaint process are other things. They don't want somebody to come in and judge how they are living, right? For whatever reason. They don't want the government to come into their home to see something that they think might create more problems for them. If you have children, and you have children that are living in a domicile that is not safe, which is legit, and I think that's a legit concern for the government to be dealing with. Those tenants are resistant because they know they potentially will lose. They'll either have to find a better home or et cetera, or they'll lose their access to their kids or however they're doing that. These government inspectors are going to 100% be mandatory reporters. There's no way that they're not. So
they're going to have to be trained to be some. I mean, I know in my line of work, if I see something, I can't just hide it.
And again, I'm using that as an example. And again, I went through 2 properties today with a representative from Safe and Livable Housing. Both those properties, in theory, were condemned. I would tell you, my gut feeling is if there's any resistance or reluctance to bring those people in, because there's a judgment thing on how they're living, on how they're managing their pets, on how the cleanliness of their homes, those kind of issues. And again, I'm not debating that, especially the ones that we looked at today are, there's landlord failures across the board on some of those, or those for sure. But I'm just saying, I think there's part of the main resistance is that. And is that a real hurdle for the department, the inspection department? Of course it is.
But that's the codes on the book, and it worked. That's what we need. And now if we can keep pushing the codes to work, at least what is on the books for so long, see how they work, implement them, let them go through the course. If we need to go in and amend something to make them work a little bit better, then get together and let's
for whatever reason,
them.
I don't understand that. We don't understand that. We've really started from the Quincy Landlord Rental Association. We have really started in the last year or so, and some of it is because of this proposal. I give you that. It's obvious that the city has not done a great job of going after these horrible landlords.
But
Why?
I did ask Michael if there was anything on the books as of right now that would prevent a bad landlord from continuing to rent out their property that is simply not safe. And there isn't anything on the
Then how
books
did
right
they
now.
get those condemned today? How'd the welcome
You
in
can
condemned?
get something condemned, but there's nothing that is. Let's say that all of the minimum housing complaints to date, which I'm not sure off the top of my head, but let's say that they were all garnered by the same landlord. There is nothing that says, okay, you have lost your right to be able to.
But on
rent
that specific property, they have.
for
It's
a
either-
Do it
temporary
again and again
period.
and again.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's how you get them run out of town.
Well, in the situation that you had, where there's the inspector goes in, finds the violations. These are code violations. The tenant is just the one that's reporting them. They're code violations. So once that's reported, the city then has an obligation to follow through for the property owner to either repair those or the building gets condemned.
Yeah, so that's not how it actually works.
That's how it's designed to work, though.
But that's not how it works. And I can tell you that in my years of experience working with the Safe and Livable Housing Committee, going on many of these inspections, serving as an advocate for specific tenants through this process, meeting monthly for years, the Safe and Livable Housing Committee has met with the inspection department specifically to talk about how the inspection process works, to follow up on specific rentals. I can tell you in my experience that what is being said is not how the process works. I brought a letter of support today from Quinata. Megan Dusterhouse, their chief executive officer, signed it. I just want to read briefly a few things from it. I last wrote to you this was directed at the city council. I last wrote to you in 2019, and I am saddened that the rental housing situation in Quincy has not improved. After 6 years of advocacy, we still do not have a way to enforce the existing city ordinances regarding minimum housing standards. There is no way currently to enforce the existing minimum housing standards that are set in place and have been for nearly 2 decades. That is exactly what Qrile sets out to do, is create an enforcement mechanism for the already existing codes. Qrile does not present any new building codes. Qrile does not even discuss the city building code because that's already set in place. That is not our objective, is to create new regulation at all, and it does not. What we are trying to do is show you that the tenant-driven complaint form does not work, and it will never work. Every city that has tried it is either living proof that it does not work or living proof that they had to switch to something else because of how badly it didn't work. You said that it's not the money, it's the time. You said that. It's not the money. And so I really wish the Quincy Landlord and Renters Association or Rental Association would stop fighting about the minimal fees of less than $3 per month. Because if it is the time, every inspection I've ever been on, the landlord is not present at those inspections. And if you would like to be present, and if you would like to have someone from your agency present, that is perfectly fine. But Qrile does not specifically state that you have to be there. We are not the ones saying you need to allocate your time. You are saying that you want to allocate your time.
Brennan,
so
you're talking about slumlords here, right?
Well,
so you're not inspecting my properties. If you inspected my properties, I'm there. If you're talking about the criminal slumlords that operate in town, sure, they're not showing up. Mm-hmm. That's without a doubt. Absolutely. But
they aren't even invited. That's not how the system works because it's a tenant-based complaint form. Jackie said specifically earlier that anyone can file a complaint form, and that much is true, but what we all acknowledged is that they cannot go into the property without the tenant being the one to make the complaint. So we could all send in complaints about 500 properties today and absolutely nothing, zero zilch would happen as a result of that because the tenants have to be involved in the process. So that is the hang-up. That's not the hang-up that I'm saying is the hang-up. It's the hang-up that Mike Seaver at the city is saying is the hang-up.
Yeah, but he could go knock on that door and say, hey, look, we've got a complaint. Would you mind we come in?
But my question is,
And then it's up to the tenant.
and I'm trying to remember, because honestly, I remember, but I don't know if I remember. What shut the welcome in down? Was it the engineering, the steps, or the concrete steps, or the landing?
It was an exterior issue.
It was an exterior issue? So they didn't have to go in and they got it condemned. So
there was a visible exterior issue, and so not every home in Quincy that is unlivable or in violation of city code is going to have
I
exterior
think that's
issues.
going to help get it started, is if they can at least see the visual impact of some of these buildings, and I see them, I tromp through them. You know, I think that we can start condemning those that are not condemned.
I mean, the city
And you're gonna
inspectors
push
could
it.
be driving around and doing that. The assumption is they just don't have the
manpower?
energy and the manpower to do that. That's my assumption. My fight back on this proposal is that you are taking that group of same inspectors, and even if you're hiring a handful more, you are now also adding a huge workload onto their plate. And that workload is 99% of properties that are going to have 0 or 1 or 2 ordinance violations that are something that are easy fixes. So basically, it's the way I kind of attribute to is you have these needles in this very little haystack, which are the horrible, you could tell, properties out in Quincy, excuse me, and then you are piling on a huge pile of additional hay, just loading a huge dump truck of additional hay.
So,
Okay, I'm sorry. I just want to, just for time's sake, I think that we need to move on. But I do kind of want to, my next question is kind of along the lines of what you were just mentioning. One of your pushbacks has been that this program could raise taxes because of the city's need to hire new inspectors, all of the administrative stuff, more trucks, et cetera, et cetera. So would the inspection fees, the registration fees, is that enough to fund the program itself, or what would you say to that point?
So yeah, I would say 2 points to that. This is an advisory referenda, and so the city council is going to have the ultimate decision and power in how this is passed. And if they discuss with the inspection department or the planning and development department and determine that they need to do less of a fee or more of a fee, then that is going to be something that is talked about publicly and proposed publicly that anyone could go oppose or support. So this is just the rough estimate of what we feel would be necessary, and the city council is more than welcome to tweak this proposal. But I do think that it's going to be enough, and this will raise over $200,000 per year. That is not from general taxpayers. It's from the fee that landlords as business owners are paying to have the privilege of operating a business in our community. And to talk about, will we have enough inspectors? Are we placing this on the inspectors that are already doing a lot of the work, right? There are 4 to 6 staff in the inspection department right now. I spoke with multiple cities in Illinois that have a similar size as us about how their rental registration program works, with how many inspectors it works, how many rentals they inspect, and I just briefly want to go over that. In Carbondale, they do about 2,000 inspections a year with 5 inspection staff. That's approximately what we have right now. They have nearly 8,000 rentals. In Addison, Illinois, they have about 1,070 rental properties, and they inspect about 800 per year with 4 housing inspection staff. In Mount Prospect, they have about 6,000 multifamily units that they inspect with 4 inspection staff. So if we have 4 to 6 inspection staff right now, and you're telling me that after hiring 2 to 3 new inspection staff, we still cannot achieve something that many cities in Illinois achieve with the exact same inspection staff we have right now, I think you're wrong, and I think that you're doubting the ability of people in Quincy. Every city in Iowa that has more than 15,000 people in it is mandated by state law to have a program just like this. It is not an arbitrary new idea that I came up with. This is an idea that is in place in many other cities. Have you guys talked to a landlord or a city official in other cities about how the program works there?
I've lived in other cities and I've operated rentals in other cities across
With
across the
a
country.
rental inspection
I
program?
have, yeah.
Okay.
So
So that's proof that it can be done, and it's proof that you were willing to operate in a city that had a rental inspection program.
I'm willing to operate if this gets passed. I'm willing to operate here. I'm not debating that. Again, it will. I don't agree with the impacts that this will have on our market, on our tenants, on our landlords that are the good landlords that operate businesses correctly. That's what I'm pushing back against, is the impacts that this will have. This will reduce the number of housing in Quincy. We already have let me finish. We already have a housing
lost 4
crisis
today.
in Quincy. We really do. We have what would be considered a housing crisis in Quincy. It's been well documented. There's been studies done. The to market rentable units are at an occupancy of north of 97%, which is not a healthy percentage. We already have a housing crisis. This is not going to add housing to Quincy, the Quincy market. It's just not.
I agree.
It's going to reduce housing in the Quincy
It's
market.
going to take unlivable homes off of the market.
I'm not debating that.
Period.
But whether they're livable to standard or not, it's going to reduce those. And again, those need to be reduced. Those need to be eliminated from the market.
Then
I'm agreeing with you.
what is the argument then? The
That
argument
that
is
it's not going to help a crisis that we already have. That's number one. Number two,
that's a separate issue from what we're discussing.
but it's an impact.
It's
a repercussion.
The only impact is that it's taking unlivable homes off of the market, which
Sure.
you acknowledge needs to happen regardless of whether this
It
passes
does.
or not.
It does.
So what is the argument? That we're taking unlivable homes
I
off the
think
market?
it's taken
I
our
think you should
focus
thank us for
away.
that.
I think.
But
I think it's taken our focus away from going to the actual problem at hand right now. I think we have ways to get these properties off the market.
It will add a cost to everybody's housing, which is this is not necessarily the time to do that. It's definitely going to add a cost to everybody's housing.
So if you guys were in charge of how we deal with properties like that, we have, as of right now, the city has no way of keeping track of all of the properties that get condemned. I know
Why
that.
do you say that? That's what you just said. The city has no way of keeping track of all the properties that get condemned?
Yes.
How is that possible?
I don't know, but I've requested the information before. I requested a list.
The city
Yes.
does not have a way to track the properties that they condemn.
That's correct.
Does that sound reasonable to you?
I'm just the messenger.
Okay,
I'm
if that's what
I
was
requested.
said,
I
We got a
requested
bigger
the city.
problem on our
not
hands.
reasonable. The
I-
reason, and the
yeah.
reason, let me answer another question as far as what we're talking about manpower to rental thing. My pushback on why I think apparently Quincy is, the inspectors, again, good people, not trying to attack them individually. I don't understand the politics of why they don't go after this person or that person or that rental property, that person. I'm not even from Quincy. I don't even understand who some of these people are. But the reason why I say that they clearly are overwhelmed now is the article that you just wrote about this fire, right? Apparently, in accordance with the article that you wrote, the inspectors were brought in, identified electric issues in this woman's apartment in October. 4 months later, there's a fire, whether it was in her unit or the unit above or whatever, and it's a tragedy, right? So I guess you got to ask the question, and everybody's asking the question. 4 months. 2 weeks is what the landlord was supposed to have to make those corrections. And then they got an extension because their contractor fell out of a tree or something, right? Another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks.
The ball got dropped.
I want to go back though to
And then
yeah.
those same inspectors are going to be walking through all of the good apartments and spending 99% of their time just hitting these 2,000 a year
When we're not addressing the problem at hand.
and looking at, hey, yep, okay, good, check, quality, good to go. They're going to spend 90% of their time doing that instead of taking their focus to be focused on the
over here.
targeted
Yes.
properties that are identified as problems.
I think we can find a way to target, to get these
I
properties.
do want to go back to the question that I was going to ask, though, when it comes to the condemned properties. How I had said that there's no way for the city to be able to go after the landlords that kind of garner those situations from happening. And you had said that they do, the building is condemned. As I had just mentioned, and I know maybe it sounds unbelievable, but as I said, I have tried to request that information before from the city. They said that they do not keep track of it. I know that there is one property on, I believe it is Ohio Street, and it's been condemned since August of 2022, I believe. And there was a woman that was trying to sell her house right across the street, and she was having problems selling her house because there was a house that was pretty much falling apart right across the street that the landlord still has not done anything for. So I guess my question is, what would you recommend that we do? And for a situation like that, how do we handle that when that's a house that, if it was in the better condition, it could provide housing for another family in town?
Sure. I mean, again, you're kind of making one of my points, which is ultimately this ordinance will speed up a process. Again, maybe rightfully so, but it will speed up a process of condemning more properties, because the people that are not operating properly are not going to make the corrections. So go after those people. They're violating the law. Go after those people. Use the laws that we have that are on the books. That property where that fire happened could easily have been condemned, especially after multiple iterations of 2 weeks you have to make these corrections, 2 weeks you have to make these corrections, 2 weeks. The city should have condemned that property. There is a backside to that, which is those poor families end up being told, hey, you have whatever the process that the city, 2 weeks, 30 days, you have to vacate this property because the landlord's not doing what they're supposed to do, the property owner is not doing what they're supposed to do, and we have to condemn it. 2 properties, in theory, that we went to today were condemned, right? 3 rental units. 1 was, without a doubt, needed to be condemned. And again, it's very sad. It's horrible, the condition of this property. I don't understand why somebody would move in. I don't understand why somebody would continue to pay rent. It's without a doubt, without question, the property owner was not doing, whether they're a landlord or not, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And that person is going to be looking for a new home, right? Or they're going to be squatting in that property because it's being condemned by the city. Same thing on another 2 units. And they were not happy. The police ended up going.
But there's also a lot of owner-occupieds too that are in.
So there's some of the
poor
worst
condition.
houses in Quincy are or were owner-occupied properties.
Not even tenant-related. So I would like to at least someone address those too, because I understand property values raising and the neighborhood values. I get all that. So to have a couple of derelict properties on a block, it's not good.
It's never good.
You know, but some of them are owner-occupieds or, you know, owner-owned and not even tenant-related. So we have to go address those as well.
And they can be condemned, and of course it creates blight. It creates a pull down on the neighborhood. All of that's without question.
There is systems in place that need to be utilized to take ownership of these properties. I mean, there's systems in place. It's just the manpower, the knowledge, the education, the money in order to go after those, to get what's on the books, to get them enforced and get them to work properly. And we'll tweak them along the way. I get it.
So Michael Seaver had said that, like I mentioned a bit ago, of why the existing system is not working, even if it is being enforced. It's still not really working. He had suggested an occupancy permit program. And additionally, Michael Seaver had proposed a database several years ago. I believe that you were involved with that whole process of getting that started. And that started as a proactive rental inspection program. And it was kind of whittled down to just a database, and that wasn't even passed by the council. But he suggested an occupancy permit program that would be for owner-occupied and rental units. It would require a habitability inspection each time ownership changes and a new person signs up for utilities. He said that that could be fulfilled with 2 more inspectors, and the frequency of that would be kind of depending on if it's a temporary, if it's like a rental unit where, you know, traveling nurses are coming in and out every 6 months or something, it would kind of depend on that. He said that if it was more intense, you might need 3 inspectors and you might need to hire an additional administrative person. So, and that's been implemented in nearby areas as well. Would you be supportive of something like that?
A database?
No, of a...
Are you asking me or them?
All of you. This is for all of you.
Okay.
Question.
The occupancy permit program, something like that. That was more so dependent on each time that a new person signs up for utilities rather than for the property owner, I guess.
Specifically the way that you just worded it, no, because
Maybe I worded it poorly
that's
too.
okay. Just specifically based on when, utilities change is not good enough, because that means that a landlord could own a property for 40 years and keep the utilities in his name. The home becomes unlivable after 40 years, and they haven't done an inspection in 40 years as a result. So how that's worded, no.
Sorry, I should have clarified. He said that there wouldn't be you would have to have one at least every 3 years.
Okay.
But for ones that are, he said that if like I said, for the apartments that the traveling nurses are coming in and out, things like that, you wouldn't need to get an inspection every 6 months. But he just didn't want there to be a significant amount of time that goes by without having one. But he didn't want to.
And these are owner occupied also.
Yes.
So all 16,000
Yes.
Homes?
houses in Quincy.
Well, I would
That's definitely an amendment for.
Before I even, you're for that?
An Amendment 4 issue.
Oh, yeah.
Constitutional issue.
I would agree
Sorry.
with you. I would agree with you. I think that the way that we went about this process and the reason that we targeted rentals specifically is because, again, they are being used to gain a profit. What you guys have said multiple times, you are professionals, you are business owners, you are operating a business. It is not your home. And this is stunning to me that we're sitting here saying that, we don't know if we can handle, even with 1 or 2 additional inspectors, inspecting all rentals in town. And the person who does the inspections is telling us we could inspect every home in town with 2 to 3 new
So why didn't
employees.
he shut down that firehouse?
Which house?
The one that burned. I'm not even
So
familiar
from
with it.
my
I'm just familiar with the
understanding-
article. Why didn't he shut it down?
That's a separate issue.
From my
entirely.
understanding, it was, and I had asked for additional information on this, and unfortunately, I did not receive it. But from my understanding, it was further communication with the landlord that, oh, just wait, we're working on it. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
Is that reasonable to you?
No.
It's not reasonable
No,
to me
it's
either.
not reasonable to me either.
It's not reasonable to me, but it's
Because-
a separate issue from what we're talking about. The process that happens after violations are found is not the issue that we were talking about.
That's the issue I would like to talk about.
Well, I would encourage you to spend 2 years developing a program and developing a process that addresses that. But what I did was take 2 years to create the program that we are here to discuss.
Sure.
So, with the two, I would just like again to clarify, Michael Seaver, who is the head inspector at the city of Quincy, is saying that with 2 to 3 new inspectors, we could inspect every property in this community. And you guys have said repeatedly that we could not do even rentals with 2 or 3 new
Ryan,
inspectors.
I don't believe him.
I don't.
Well, that's your prerogative, but I'm telling you, I know that it happens in other cities, and Michael Seaver is saying that it can happen in Quincy. All of the research that we have done for 2.5 years point to that being the case, and you guys can say you don't believe it, but do you have any evidence to back that up? Because I can show you
Math,
the
I
evidence
guess.
of other cities.
It's just math.
The math is that 5 inspectors
I'm
inspect
still going
2,000
down that
rentals
rabbit hole.
per.
I get Carbondale,
Okay.
Addison. I don't know, but I'm telling you, you can take the 6,500, divide that by 3 for those, but again, that's 0, right? So as soon as you find one, a lot of times, really great landlords are going to have 1 to 3 violations that are just some minor thing to correct. So boom, you're in the B grade. Now you're cutting that down to 2. Then you've got the real horrible ones, and they're going multiple. You're not going to get 2,000 inspections. You're probably going to get 3,000, possibly more. And each one of those has to be coordinated. That means a letter to the tenant, a letter to the property owner. They need to meet. Again, one of the reluctances, for instance, you can take this program and kind of compare some of the aspects of it to, for instance, the Section 8 program, right? So the Section 8 program does annual inspections of their properties to make sure that they're to the standard of Section 8, which is to code, and then some additional kind of things. For a long time, I was reluctant here in Quincy to jump on board with that. And it's not because, the real reason was because it's a bureaucratic process that gets added onto my business, essentially. First one, and again, I will tell you, the only reason I even jumped into that was the gentleman that runs Quincy Housing Authority is sharp. That's the sharpest guy I've ever seen run a housing authority in any city that I've ever been in. So I saw that guy speak. I talked to him. I said, you know what? Let me try this. Let me get one, push it directly to Section 8. I did that one. The first one. Inspector didn't show. Here I am sitting in front of the house. It was before the tenant moved in, right? Inspector doesn't show up. So I'd sit there for 45 minutes. I go back to my office. I call the office. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus. I'm sure I am. I'm sure I'm going to get hate for this or whatever. But, you know, at the end of the day, the guy that was going to do that was sick. So I said, why didn't you call me? You could have called us. That's what it came out. You could have called us.
This is super anecdotal and not really
It's
relevant.
not anecdotal. When you take that and multiply it by thousands, there are great landlords in this town that don't want to touch Section 8 because of exactly why I just said
More government.
And again,
it's just not good.
Which is actually a reason that people should vote yes for this, because right now, landlords are hesitant to do inspections because often their properties, unfortunately, would not pass those
That's not why I'm
inspections.
hesitant, though.
No.
I'm not saying you.
That property was...
No, I don't want to be thrown in the bus with those 2% that are giving us a bad name. I don't.
I didn't throw you under the bus.
No, I know, but I'm part of the landlord business. I have rentals.
So can I finish my statement?
Yes.
Thank you. So there are landlords in town who are not willing to do Section 8 because they will not pass inspection, period. It's not just Section 8. Many social service agencies in town require inspections before agreeing to pay rent for the people that they are working with, their clients. And so often they cannot find rentals in the same way that people looking for market rate non-inspection homes can. If every home that is being used for a profit, every rental were inspected, there would be no fear of inspection because every home would have to be inspected regardless of whether they're Section 8 or not. So to a degree, that would lessen the impact of them having 40 or 50 unfulfilled Section 8 vouchers out right now. It would help them, not hurt them.
If we were to just lock you guys all in a room and say you can't come out until you agree on something that works, that you think will be efficient, that you think will benefit the town as a whole, would you be able to do that? Are you guys willing to all come together if it means that we could find a
aiming
solution?
for the same goal in mind. We all want safe and livable
But are
housing.
these goals, are these approaches too far away?
A
to
mandatory
find
inspection of every
compromise?
rental unit in Quincy is too far away, in my opinion. Just like Jackie just said, we are actually all on the same team.
Absolutely.
Jackie and I are perfect examples, and there's many, many landlords. We work every day in Quincy to provide quality housing in this town. There's the Quincy land. There's some stats were thrown out, but a lot of landlords are actively growing. Are they growing their business for profit? In theory, sure, but have taken properties that are unoccupied for decades and turning them into great homes for people. And we're working as hard as we can to do that with our own money and our own time.
It's a risk.
It's not necessarily a clean business all the time to do it. We are doing that. We aren't reluctant on this proposal because we're afraid of an inspector. We're reluctant on this proposal because we honestly think this is not the right approach to solve the housing issues that we have, to include the slumlords in this city. We think a different approach is
It can be done.
enforced with the right energy, using the right tools that the city probably should have been using this whole time. I don't understand why they haven't, to go after and fix those individual issues. It will have second and third order effects, to include people who are pushed out of their homes because they're being placarded, et cetera. And I'm just saying that's a real thing, and that's not as a fear tactic. These people should not be living in those homes. They're not safe. So there needs to be a process that does that. We do have a process. Does it have its issues? For sure. But again, I mean, the thing that's really frustrating, and I know the Safe and Livable House, they put a lot of energy into kind of focusing on those properties that are clearly identified as, not good. And the landlords, the property owners can either put their money where their mouth is and increase the value of their assets and get them fixed, or they can get shut down. And I think that's part of how the market works. In my opinion, and I said this 4 years ago, the first thing that should fix this, and again, I know it can be bloody, but it's the market economy, which is if somebody goes into a rental, I want my rentals to look great because I want to rent them, right? So if somebody comes in and looks at a hole in the wall and, you know, rats running around the house or something, like, how would you expect to rent that? And again, there's people in this town that are doing that. And unfortunately, it's a colliding of immoral people that have immoral issues with doing those rentals, and tenants that feel like that's the best option that they have is to move into these homes that are not good.
I think too, if there are getting condemned homes, right, for whoever, in time the income is going to stop. They're not going to be able to maintain one insurance, which they probably won't get insurance coverage anyway with some of the conditions of these homes. But the property taxes is a big thing. If they're not having the income or the money to pay these property taxes, then eventually that tax buyer will be able to go after that property if they choose to. So I'm just here thinking, like, I don't think some of these condemned homes are going to sit there for 30 or 40 years. Because eventually that owner is going to stop paying property taxes on it. So one of these tax buyers is going to be able to come in and take possession of this property. They can either sell it, fix it up, whatever, to get them moving again. We've got to get the process started sooner than later, because that's a 3.5-year waiting period to get the foreclosure rights for not paying your property taxes. So if we continue to shut down in that homeowner, slumlord, stops the income coming in, whoever, is not going to have the money to keep paying. And eventually that's one way to get these properties back. To get some of the city has grants out there. I'm sure the state has the housing grants to help these homeowners to fix up these dilapidated properties.
Gotcha.
I know the city has $250,000 a year. I think that they set aside
This
for
land thing?
4 years or something.
Land
Yeah.
bank.
So we
Sorry,
encourage.
did you say that you have rental properties in places that do have proactive inspections?
I have had.
And what was that like in what was the market in those cities? What was it like for you as a landlord? Was it efficient? Did it not work?
It did not work. Bad towns, really. I mean, and there's a reason why I don't operate them anymore. Not necessarily because of that program, because they weren't. It's just kind of a sign that things are just going downtown, going downhill in a city sometimes when they reach that. And maybe that's what this is. It's just, unfortunately, it needs to be. Quincy has some real problems. They need to address them. And housing is definitely a real problem in Quincy. And I think a lot of the reason why this issue is such a heightened issue now in the big picture is, again, we have a housing shortage in Quincy. Mm-hmm. And
I think say it hasn't worked. What specifically about the program that you operated under already in other cities did not work in regard to rentals? The inspectors would come through and just, not do anything right. They wouldn't actually show up. You're supposed to be contacted to do an inspection. And if you just don't hear from them, you just don't hear from them, right? I mean, so... Well, I have more faith in Quincy than I do what is being purported
Harrisburg, PA, or whatever. Sure.
Yeah, so I definitely have more faith in the people of Quincy as well. So I want to answer your question, though, of if we were in a locked room, could we get somewhere?
We could.
I
have
think that
faith
we could.
in
and
us.
I think that the proof that we could is explained by exactly how we got to this situation today, right now. So in 2018, the Poverty Project started as a result of a local photographer highlighting the unsafe conditions that many people were living in this community. And the Safe and Livable Housing Committee began to form as a result of that. We came to the city and said, we need a proactive rental inspection ordinance. And we need this based on the fact that there are many unsafe rentals in our community and based on the fact that it works in so many other places in similar in size to us. That failed, and that failed for many reasons, but the main reason was that the Landlord Association, or landlords in general, applied pressure to city council members and said, this is not what we want. We are the ones that this targets, and we don't want this. And your specific concerns back then were that many tenants are not good tenants. And so what the Safe and Livable Housing did as a result of that was hold multiple tenant workshops. Over 150 tenants came and learned about their rights, their responsibilities. They were provided with hundreds of dollars in cleaning supplies. They were provided with their very first bank accounts if they did not already have one. They were taught budgeting. They were taught healthy minds, bodies, and spirits, etc.
Do they still do that?
We are in the process of planning our next one, and we held two in 2024. So the point is, we took your concerns very seriously, and the Safe and Livable Housing Committee raised over $25,000 to put on these programs at zero cost to you and zero cost to tenants. You did not offer money to help us with that. You did not offer to come teach at these workshops. You did not offer to come.
We did have landlords that
I got told, no, I'm not welcome. I did get that. I did ask, because I was a realtor. I really want to be a part of this.
Okay.
And that
I
proposed
really
ordinance, for instance, myself
I
and
did
another landlord were
ask
on
to be a part of it.
Okay.
And there's an email I have to the mayor. Again, I'm not speaking for all landlords.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
So
I did.
thank you for offering then. I apologize.
did
I was not
ask.
involved in that specific process with you. The point is that we took that on ourselves because of the concerns that you outlined. Another concern that you outlined very specifically was that this targets good landlords unfairly. So what we went and did was find programs in other cities that does not do that. That specifically targets bad landlords, cuts down costs for good landlords, and also built in our program is an online public listing of all landlords and the grade that they receive to show that you are good landlords when you are good landlords. We reduced the amount of inspections that good landlords would have to participate in. We reduced the fees that good landlords would have to pay because of your specific concerns. So I do think that we can get somewhere, and we have shown willingness to do that, but this has been a conversation for 6 years, and really, right now, is the first time I'm seeing you guys come to the table. We have worked with the inspection department for 4+ years, helping to get these properties that are unlivable condemned. You guys haven't done that. You guys keep saying there's got to be a better way, but you offer no better way. You offer no program that works better. If you have one, I'm super willing to discuss it, but you just keep saying we should do things differently.
Okay, sorry.
Let me just respond to that specifically. And because this is kind of an important thing. And again, you're making a good point. But again, to go after if there's a bunch of failing ice cream stores, to go after the good ones and saying, hey, good ice cream stores, why haven't you fixed these bad ice cream stores? It's just not a reasonable argument.
It's not my argument.
Well, it's not necessarily my specific responsibility as much as it's any other citizen in Quincy's responsibility to fix the city codes. I jumped in 2021 when the mayor, I think it was 21, when the mayor had his panel through the summer of that summer, myself and another landlord, and I think another member was already a landlord or something, agreed to do that panel. And in that fact, after all of the results of that, I emailed the mayor, and again, it was hashed. It's not nearly what it was originally proposed as, and I said, I personally am in support. I think this is a good compromise. I'm in support of this proposal. And then again, it did not pass through the alderman. And I was frustrated at that because I put a lot of good work into that, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess the point is if the landlords have been, the good landlords have just been, vacant from this or UA from AWOL from being part of this process. I mean, I'm not an advocate. That's not my job. Yeah. And I'm not saying it's your job specifically either, but the idea that we just haven't put in the work to fix all these
You
bad
are buying
landlords.
these properties, though,
Sure.
in question. You are buying these condemned, dilapidated properties.
Last year, in
doing
2024,
that.
I added 8 rental units to Quincy. Those were 8 homes that were unlivable that became livable. And that's with my hard work and
There's
my
a few
money and my
landlords
energy
that are
to do
doing that in these targeted areas. They are there, but they are one people. They can only do so much at a time.
So in conclusion, it's a very simple yes or no question. Please do not go into it any further. Will you commit to coming together, having more conversations like this if Qrile does not pass?
Yes.
Next
Yes. So the
Regardless
Quincy
if it
Landlord
passes.
Yes or no?
Association-
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
We just have to.
Yes.
Everyone says yes?
Yes.
Everyone says yes. Okay. Thank you so much for watching, and I guess we will see you maybe next time when we have another conversation like this. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.